Welcome folks, Hobo Rider back here with you somewhere in Southeast Asia, and I'd like to take the opportunity to introduce my new project, and this project is called the Curse of Styrofoam. And it doesn't take much to be able to see the amount of pollution and the problems that styrofoam and its byproducts have caused for a number of years now. So with that, we're going to take a look at the history of styrofoam, how it's made, and how it ends up on our beaches and places all over the world. So welcome to the project, the Curse of Styrofoam. Thanks, folks. So let's talk about the accidental discovery of styrene. And this took place in 1839 by a German pharmacist. And what he was doing is he was distilling a gumwood tree. And to explain why, at this point in time there were substances from the gumwood tree, which is a member of the Styrene tree family, and they would use it in perfume as well as medicines. So he noticed that while distilling this substance came out, a kind of clear, oily substance. Didn't pay too much attention to it, but about 3 to 4 days later he noticed that this substance had actually thickened. Prior to that, he had named it styrol, coming from the styrax tree, but 4 days later when he noticed this transformation, if you will, of what happened with the oil thickening, he gave it the name of styrol oxide, which is a monomer. And from there, we'll go into what happened pretty much not until 80 years later. So 80 years later, it was realized by a German chemist whose name was Hermann Staudinger, and he realized that by heating this styrol it started a chain reaction and it was producing macromolecules. This led to the substance styrol getting its original name that carries through today, and that's polystyrene. So from there we'll go, I guess it's probably another 40 to 50 years into what happened next. Then in 1931, another German scientist by the name of I.G. Fairbairn, he developed a reactor vessel, and with this he forced polystyrene through it. It was a heated tube, and at the end there was a cutter producing the first polystyrene in pellet form. Then during 1918 to 1996, a chemical engineer working for Dow Chemical, and his name was Otis Ray McIntyre, rediscovered a process that was first discovered and patented by Carl Munter. He was a Swedish gentleman. So Dow Chemical decided they'd buy the rights from Mr. Munter, and at that point they began producing what we know today as styrofoam, or polystyrene, which it originally was named. But nonetheless, in 1944, Dow Chemical patented the name for styrofoam. From that point on, many other companies created different varieties of polystyrene, of which we'll go through in the future in this video. One of the things that I wanted to mention, which I didn't, and that is the fact that most of this latter processes, if you will, for styrofoam is a byproduct of petroleum. It's not the styro that actually came from the styrax trees. So I just wanted to clear that up because styrene itself is in a lot of different forms in a lot of different plants and chemicals and so forth. So anyhow, the current styrofoam is a byproduct of petroleum. So I just wanted to get that cleared up. Well, I thought I'd just take a brief moment and explain on a very simplistic level, if you will, what polystyrene or styrofoam actually is. We're not talking about the original styrene that came from the gum tree. What we're talking about now is a synthetic polymer that is actually a liquid hydrocarbon that is derived from petroleum or natural gas. And the process involves extracting styrene or refining it and then polymerizing it. And what does polymerizing mean? It means it's a chemical reaction that joins monomer molecules together to form larger molecules. And that's about as simple as I can make it, because there again, I'm not a scientist. But having researched this and looking at this, you can actually see in styrofoam or polystyrene you can actually see the molecules that we're talking about. And that's what makes styrofoam or any of the other products that are made out of this so very strong and so very light. And we already talked about why this stuff is light, and there again, these large macromolecules are filled with air. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense, but that's just a brief description of what polystyrene is, coming from a guy that's not a scientist. Thanks, folks. Let's talk briefly about the advantages and disadvantages of styrofoam. First off, one of the major advantages is the fact that it's extremely light. Why is it so light? Because its molecular structure is composed of 95 to 98% air, which makes it extremely light. And it's also very, very rigid. That's another advantage, because you can make extruded products with styrofoam. You can shape it just about any way you want. It's very, very rigid. And then the next one is insulation. Why insulation? Very, very simple. 95, 98% air prevents cold from getting in or heat from getting out. So there are three advantages right there. It's light, it's rigid, and it has tremendous insulation properties. Now let's talk about the disadvantages that go right along with light. Is a disadvantage because what happens is this stuff breaks up. It just blows around. It's very, very light. Wind picks it up and moves it. The other fact is that it's very, very rigid. And the fact that it's rigid and it does break up really easily, there again, it's another disadvantage, because now it's moving. And whether it's moving in the air or whether it's moving on the water, it's a disadvantage. Which actually brings us up to the next portion of the disadvantage, and that is the fact that when this stuff breaks down, and it breaks down in the water, it doesn't biodegrade. It breaks down, in particular in salt water. And the small molecular structure that it's made up of starts to break apart into very, very small molecules, of which the marine life think it's food. They eat it. What's in this that's a disadvantage to both to the fish, marine life, and us? Styrene. And this is not the styrene that's coming from the Styrex trees. This is a byproduct of petroleum. So the styrene starts to leach out into the fish. We eat the fish, leaches into us. And with that, we're going to move into another part eventually here, and we'll talk about the medical issues relative to this leaching of styrene, in particular products, petroleum products that are made out of polystyrene. So with that, I hope it gives you just a little brief insight on styrofoam. Let's talk about the medical issues regarding polystyrene, styrofoam, and the styrene, obviously, that's within these products. They create a tremendous health risk, both to the marine life, the fishes, as well as any living creature, including the humans. So some of the areas with regards to humans that we deal with is it affects the nervous system, it affects the respiratory system, your skin, your eyes. One of the big ones is our endocrine system. And a definition of the endocrine system, I'm just going to read it so that I keep it simple here. There again, not being a scientist, but nonetheless, what is the function of the human endocrine system? It regulates the body's biological processes by releasing specific hormones into the bloodstream. So you can understand why introducing a disruptor, if you will, which is styrene, into that endocrine system, it blocks certain things that the endocrine system is responsible for in our body. So that's just, as I said, a very brief description of what goes on with the endocrine system, but nonetheless, the health risks that are related to styrene or polystyrene, there again, a petroleum byproduct, are fairly immense. and the fact that it does not biodegrade keeps this product, or keeps that styrene within our environment and within our bodies for a very, very long time if it's ingested. And we'll talk about the leaching of styrofoam in another section here when we're talking about specific food products or storage products that are used, and how the styrene actually leaches out of that, once again, into the human body. So that's just a very, very small part of the medical issues that are related to styrene or the polystyrene products that we use. So let's talk about the styrene leaching, and I know I touched on it a little bit with regards to the medical issues, but let's talk about food packaging. This one here really got my attention. An article that was done and study done by the World Health Organization discovered that the water within these plastic bottles, they measured the styrene concentration in the very beginning, in other words, when the bottles were first produced, and then after the bottles were stored for 1 year, and tested the amount of styrene that was initially in the water, which was 29.5 micrograms per liter. And then at the end of a year, it more than doubled the amount of styrene in the water to 69.53 micrograms per liter. That's a pretty significant increase in the amount of styrene that's leaching from the plastic container, there again remembering a petroleum byproduct, into our drinking water. So it's definitely something to think about. And then from there, what happens to the leaching with regards to landfills? Well, if it leaches into the water here, it's probably going to leach into the water supply as well, affecting whether it's the underground water or water that is going to a treatment plant. Nonetheless, it's leaching into that water in landfills. We already talked about the fish. That's pretty much a no-brainer. We know at this point the fact that it's not biodegradable, and the fact that the fish eat it, the styrene leaches directly into the fish. We touched on that already. Another one is with regards to the indoor air in areas where a lot of these materials are used. The polystyrene that creates the plastic, the polystyrene that creates the styrofoam insulation. You name it, you walk around, you can find it. So just a little brief description of what happens with polystyrene or styrene leaching into our environment and eventually into us. Styrene leaching, it's definitely a huge issue. Well, we've talked at length about polystyrene, styrofoam, the products that are made out of it, and the fact that it has become a major pollution throughout the entire world. So, what are the solutions? Currently, there's a lot of research being done to try to figure out how to dissolve this stuff either into a usable product or just to be able to get rid of it. But at this point in time, that's exactly what it is. It's a lot of research. The other possibility that actually is happening is the banning of styrofoam products, in particular food products. So you go to a restaurant, you go to a hotel, you decide to get a takeout. Up until probably a couple years now, it was always a styrofoam product, polystyrene, all right, put it in there. Same way with your drinks, your hot coffee and so forth, always styrofoam cups. And why they put coffee in styrofoam cups? Because of its insulating characteristics, keeps your coffee hot. But I want to touch just briefly on that. We talked about styrene leaching. Well, you put hot fluid into a styrofoam cup and it dramatically increases the styrofoam leaching, or the styrene leaching from that cup into your drink. Just something to think about. So a lot of these food products are being banned and being replaced with a biodegradable product. Usually it's paper or something similar to that. Then the one that I found really fascinating, and it seems to provide a great deal of hope, and that is the new superworms. And you go, wow, superworm, what is this? Well, in 2015, the Chinese discovered that mealworms love to eat styrofoam, all right? And they've actually figured out that one mealworm can eat as much as 46.36 milligrams a year. Now that milligrams doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you put hundreds of thousands of these worms together, it is a possible solution, all right? But then we get into the biggest solution of all, and it's the one that just boggles my mind, and that's the human factor. When we talk about how are you going to get rid of the styrofoam, well, you've already seen footage and you'll see more. There's more styrofoam out here than you could ever possibly imagine, and it's there. And every year there's more and more and more. I mean, you walk out there and it's just basically a styrofoam beach. And that's just not here. That's all over the world. And there again, you know, a lot of these places rely on tourism, people coming to the wonderful beaches. Well, I'm telling you right now, at least the beaches that you're seeing in Southeast Asia, and some of them, which I'll touch on later, some of them being ranked as one of the top 10 beaches, most beautiful beaches in Southeast Asia. And then you get out there and you see beaches like this, and you're going, who's doing the evaluation on what's beautiful? I mean, come on, folks. So there again, dealing with the human factor. And that's going to be probably a separate portion of this, if you will, as to how do we deal with the human factor? How do we deal with a culture that's ingrained with just throwing everything away, or just throwing it on the floor, or throwing it in the ocean? That is a really, really difficult issue, because this issue, yes, we can control the amount of styrofoam that's being manufactured, but it appears at this point in time we cannot control the amount of styrofoam or plastic products that people just chuck into that ocean, or our waterways, or our landfills. I am really stymied, if you will, as to how do we stop this. Yes, education, educate our children. Hopefully the children, as I stated in my other project, the Disappearing Mekong, with regards to the pollution that's going in that, is to educate the children, and if we're real lucky, the children can educate the adults. And that's a tough issue. But there again, that human factor in this is the big one. And how we go about solving that, education is probably the single biggest, along with banning products that are made out of this stuff. But then again, we got to come up with another solution to create the same advantages that styrofoam creates. What we're looking at here is actually the styrofoam that is broken apart in the ocean itself. It does not biodegrade, but what it does is it breaks down into these macromolecules, which used to be in something like this, but then what happens is they break out and they float into the ocean. Thereby the marine life eats this stuff, not knowing really what it is. So consequently the styrene is now going into their body system, and you can only imagine, we catch the fish, we eat the fish, now we have styrene in our body. And there's a certain amount of it that leaches out a lot of different products. But I just wanted to show you these macromolecules as they break down in the ocean, but there again, this is about as far as they go. They don't biodegrade. So I thought we'd take a look in this pile here on the beach, one of the many, many piles, and figure out of all of this stuff that's here, how much of this is actually polystyrene or is actually made from polystyrene. Obviously, polystyrene, styrofoam, more styrofoam. The plastic here, the hard plastic, byproduct of polystyrene. These are floats off of a fishing net, polystyrene. Plastic lighter, polystyrene. What is left of a plastic coat hanger, polystyrene. Here's an interesting one that there's a lot of them made, the plastic toothbrushes, polystyrene. Anyhow, there's a light bulb, probably not polystyrene, that's glass. But then if we look up here, not sure if this is all plastic. I thought it was wire, but it's actually plastic. byproduct, polystyrene. And then of course, whoever lost their sandal here, their flip-flop, polystyrene. Plastic bottle, polystyrene. So I think you get the picture here, folks. It's a mess. And all of this stuff is in our oceans. Obviously somebody throws it in the ocean. And a lot of this is because of the fishermen, because otherwise it wouldn't be in the water and it wouldn't be here. So I thought I'd just give you a little example of some of the stuff that actually traces all the way back to polystyrene. There's a magic marker, polystyrene. So with that, folks, we'll move on into a different area. I know I've previously mentioned, how do we stop this? I mean, the pollution here, as well as other places in the world, is unbelievable. How are you going to stop it? Much less clean it up. I don't know. You know, I'm at the point where I kind of wonder if this is even solvable. Because if you stop producing styrofoam or polystyrene products, that's not, in reality, that's not going to happen, because there's too many products that are made out of polystyrene, the byproduct of petroleum. So what are we going to do? I mean, this mess here goes for hundreds of miles, and it's only one area in Southeast Asia. I talked briefly about education. I talked about that in my river project, the Disappearing Mekong. And I still believe that, but however, if the governments within these countries don't have a strong movement forward, if you will, in teaching the children so that the children can teach their parents, because this is the parents here. This is predominantly everything you see and that I've shown you on these beaches is the fishermen, all right? So how do you educate the fishermen to basically give a shit? And I apologize for saying that, but nonetheless, that's the hard, cold fact. How do you get them to care? Because it's just whoosh, off the boat, into the water, out of sight. I don't have to worry about it anymore. But the problem is, it all washes ashore eventually, in particular with the storms that they get here. Even on a nice day, you can walk out there today. You'll have bottles floating, you'll have styrofoam floating, you'll have stuff like this, whatever the hell that is, but it's definitely a polystyrene product. So anyhow, I think one of the issues is that in a lot of these areas across the world, you're dealing with people that are living in poverty. And living in poverty, the trash, the styrofoam, the garbage, in many respects, it's the last thing on their mind. Because they're just trying to make a living, trying to take care of their children, trying to put food on the table. And, you know, that gets to the issue that, well, America's dealing with right now, and that's the 1%ers. We're losing our middle class due to about 1,000 of the richest people in the United States. And it's not just the United States. Here in Southeast Asia, it's the same way. You have the 1%ers in all of the countries in Southeast Asia as well. And the other thing that creates a lot of the issues here in Southeast Asia is the black money issue. There's so much money that goes into the back pockets of politicians or those in charge that if you tried to clean up a project like this, for example, let's say a I don't know, non-government, you know, an NGO comes in and decides to spend hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars cleaning this up. Well, that's all fine and dandy, but how much money is spent giving it to the government, and then the government doesn't follow through on the project? That's not unusual here in Southeast Asia or any other place in the world where you have governments that are not accountable. And that's what this is. And I can give you an example in this particular area. You know, the government, they put a young lady, an environmental activist, put her in prison. And why? They trumped up some charge that, you know, tax evasion. Well, that's a classic bullshit trumped up thing. But nonetheless, she was bringing up things just like this, all right, showing that somebody is not doing their job. And when you get to looking at all of this, if it doesn't come from the government, i.e. regulations and enforcement, that's the key issue here too. You can make all the fancy rules in the world, but if you don't have the people to enforce those real rules that prevent this kind of stuff, it ain't ever going to happen, folks. And that's the hardcore issue of what we're dealing with here and other places in the world with products like this. You know, hopefully, maybe we can find something that will suffice to not have to make this kind of stuff anymore. I kind of doubt it. But as I showed earlier, I mean, you look in this pile, and there's every conceivable thing on this beach that you could imagine that is made out of polystyrene. Everything. There's very little it isn't. I mean, there's a piece of wood over there, and there's some sticks. But nonetheless, everything else that you can see and everything else I've shown you is polystyrene, the byproducts of polystyrene, styrofoam, all right, and plastics, because it's all made out of petroleum byproducts. So I guess in the end, folks, I don't really know how to properly end this, other than the fact that obviously I do this, maybe, just maybe, it'll make a difference. Maybe one young person will come out and realize that maybe he or she can make a difference, providing they don't put you in jail or prison. But nonetheless, something has to happen. Can you imagine what this is going to look like in another 10 years? The styrofoam will be up to here, or in reality, because it's so light, like over there in the woods, it just fills up in the woods, And then what happens is the vines and all the green stuff grow over the top of it, and everybody thinks it's gone away. Well, it's not. So there again, hopefully we can come up with some way, or the scientists can come up with some way of making this stuff valuable again, and then maybe people will recycle it. But until that happens, this will sit here for 1,000 years. I know I'm not going to be here. You're not going to be here. But this stuff right here will still be here. Think about that, folks.